We have a really interesting question today from Nicole, who writes that she has been exploring her interest in CNC and always finds herself hitting a wall when trying to explain what it is she likes about it. Even when she tries to write it out as a fantasy, she gets scrambled-brained. She wonders if this is because she's somewhat inexperienced and is trying to gain confidence around the subject, and is wondering how she might be better able to articulate why it is she enjoys what she does.
So I feel like there's actually two questions here. Is number one, understanding herself, why do I like this? And number two, understanding her reaction to it. Even when she's writing about it, she's trying to write erotica or whatever, and she finds herself getting scramble-brained because she is falling into this extremely compelling fantasy that represents a significant part of who she is sexually. And it's very natural to have that experience of being a bit scrambled when you're falling into that fantasy, especially, and this is important, especially as a submissive. One of the interesting differences, I think, between the dominant and submissive experience is that part of the pleasure of submission is a bit of scramble-mindedness, a sense of drifting, a sense of being foggy and kind of pleasantly ensconced with someone that you trust pulling the strings and directing the show. Part of the pleasure of dominance is almost a hyper-awareness, an excess of clarity, a sense of knowing what all the right steps are to direct this scene the way you want it to go. So it's important to realize that on some level, falling into that submissive headspace as she is fantasizing is a bit natural. Now, as to why she likes it, I think that CNC as a kink is related pretty clearly to notions of power, the notion of being overcome by a force stronger than yourself. I think that plays into biological and cultural desires that are often, especially in our current society, suppressed. Why do women want taller men on average? Not that no women are with shorter men, but by and large, women would prefer to be with someone taller. Why is it that women tend to marry men who are more financially successful? Or at the very least, don't marry men who are less financially successful? These are statements of power. There's the notion of being with someone stronger, faster, smarter, more successful than you are. And that is very appealing. And there are biological reasons for that, especially with CNC kink. It plays into the notion of being uncivilized. Consent is a fundamentally civilized notion. Animals don't consent in the ways that humans do. Playing into that is shucking off the norms of civilization, being very deeply into an animalistic side and an instinctual side that craves the notion of a man not only being stronger, but demonstrating that he is stronger by overcoming her resistance, by taking her. Not her giving him sex, but him taking it. That's the essence of that psychological experience. And it's very natural for her to crave that because that animalistic side is in the shadow, is in the psychological shadow that drives so much of libido, drives so much of sexuality, especially kinky sexuality. So to answer that, that's why, right, is that there's biological and cultural underpinnings that are pushed into the shadow and are being reclaimed along with her libido in these sexual fantasies. Hey all, this is Athos. If you're enjoying this content and you'd like to see more, please be sure to spank that subscribe button. It's been very naughty. And if you'd like to have your question answered on the show, please feel free to ask us by email at deeperkink@gmail.com or click the link in the description below to complete the form. Now, back to the show.
That's a very good propositional explanation. I took the question a bit differently. It doesn't have to be CNC. She could have just said,
Sure.
I'm trying to explain why I like to be spanked. And then you could go on about biology and this and that or the other. One way of saying it as well, it's part of your shadow. There's a shadow side of you that likes to be dominated. But then at some point in time, you get to the end of the whys. You're like, then why do you want to be dominated? And why is it like this and like that and the other? There comes a point where there's no answer to the why at the end of the day. It almost seems like she's in touch with her shadow self. She knows what she wants, CNC or spanking, whatever it is. And while she is fully integrated experientially with it, she's having a difficult time coming up with the propositions to justify it perhaps to other people. It's because of these specific philosophical reasons that this is so appealing. At some point, it just is. And then we retrofit explanations on the back end to explain why it is that this is so appealing. But it's just a deep core need or a part of you. I want to be dominated, or I want to dominate. And for most people, that's as much of an explanation as they really need. And then you can say, well, this is part of our shadow, and all of those things are completely true. But perhaps she's having a difficult time reconciling that. She has this persona where, like, wow, CNC is such a core, and it's such a difficult thing to talk about. It's so taboo in some sense. How can she really come up with a philosophy that justifies it really? To some extent, there's a conflict almost between her persona and her shadow, and she's trying to come up with some philosophical tendrils to connect one to the other that is extra experiential, not rooted in just the phenomenology of the experience of being dominated or dominating, but perhaps there's more philosophical construction around the experience.
Those are a bit conflicting, right? Is on one hand, the desire for a philosophical explanation, that's why I gave this sort of intellectualized version that exists. So that's why I gave it. She's looking for a philosophical underpinning. This is the philosophical underpinning. But to your point, part of it is also at the ground truth of this is who I am. This is the way I fit with the universe. This is what I like. It's a taste, a preference. Why are some people heterosexual? Well, that's just what I like. I think that notion mixes with the philosophical, and the reason the philosophical becomes useful is if I have a more precise understanding of exactly what it is I like, the better I can tune and communicate with partners how to give me the experience I want and how to find partners who are likewise oriented in wanting the complementary experience that I want.